Assistant Police and Crime Commissioner, but Rich Costello and I are substituting for him today.
Chair, I have further apologies received from councillors Bridget Jones, Stephen Craddock, George Duggins, Simon Phipps, Bob Slay, Izzy Seckham, and also apologies received from Henrietta Brearley, Vanessa Jardine, Catherine Mangan, and David Melbourne.
Right. I'm not too sure who all those are and who want to make this meeting quorus. I'm not too sure. Does anybody know? Apologies, because this is my first meeting as well, isn't it? This is my first meeting, so I'm not too sure. So it looks as though Paul Sanderson, you want to say something?
Yes, just that I'm Paul Sanderson here for the Office of Health Improvement and Disparities, and here sat in place for Sue Ibbotson, who's indisposed today and gives her apologies. Thank you.
Okay. Stephanie Taylor.
Hi, yeah, I'm here on behalf of Wolverhampton Council. I'm a graduate management trainee in policy and strategy, so I'm just going to take some notes and then take them back to my manager and leader too.
Okay. Can't really see anybody else on this screen. Neelam, you're the housing, aren't you? Housing.
Yeah, Homelessness Task Force.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we're just waiting for Jean as well, Chair.
Okay. She'll join us, won't she? So agenda item 2 then is the declarations of interest. So members are reminded of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests they have in an item being discussed during the course of this meeting. In addition, the receipt of any gift or hospitality should be declared where the value is thought to have exceeded £25 in gifts or £40 in hospitality. Does anybody have any declarations today? Great, thank you. So agenda item 3 is Chair's remarks. As you can imagine, I haven't got many remarks as this is my first meeting. So apologies if I fumble through things. I will try my best and obviously catch up with things moving on, and hopefully we can have a productive meeting in the future. But just to say, there are a couple of things that this meeting picks up, which is community safety and homelessness. I think both of them tie in, and that's more or less to do with the cabinet portfolios that I've held at Sandwell Council in the past, and obviously now with neighbourhoods. Okay, so I mean, if anybody's got any questions they'd like to ask me, or feel. Crisps, please. Right. Agenda item 4 is minutes of the last meeting. So is there anybody on here who was in the last meeting who can identify these as a true record? Anybody at all? No.
As an officer, I can.
Okay. Is that allowed? I'm not too sure what's allowed.
I don't know. I'll have to ask for Craig. I don't think so, no.
Okay.
Can I just double check that and come back to the board in this meeting? If I can just double check.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So there's no point going on to matters arising then, because otherwise I don't think there's any matters arising, but if there was in these instances, then because there's nobody here from the last meeting, we won't be able to do that section anyway. Is that right? Is that I'm thinking? Okay. So we'll move on to agenda item 6, which is levelling up white paper and trailblazer devolution deal, and that's over to Ed Fox, please. He's going to talk us through it.
Thanks, Councillor Carmichael. And there is a paper in our agenda packs starting on page 7, which talks about this, but I will just say a few words of introduction. So I imagine people are aware of the fact that I think it was on the 2nd of February, the Levelling Up white paper was published by the government. It's a very interesting document, and I would encourage people to read it, albeit it's 323 pages long. But I think it does two things, and people will have seen this reported in the media, no doubt. First of all, it carries a fairly detailed analysis of the challenges that face the country in relation to regional disparities, and why we need levelling up, and it defines levelling up as being an unfairness about both the way in which people don't have opportunities, even though talent is spread fairly, but also disparities within our regions and between our regions. And I think it's fair to say that the analytical sections of the report are really quite challenging to conventional economic development orthodoxy, and in particular those departments that believe that investment should be spatially blind, and not targeted on particular places for particular reasons. So that's the sort of, and there's a very big emphasis on long-term systems change rather than short-term policy, and the importance of changes both to government and to governance more broadly. And the idea of 12 missions, levelling up missions, which are set out in the paper that we've shared, which give a suggestion that this does need to be a long-term change between now and 2030. I would argue beyond that as well, but the paper is very focused on what needs to change by 2030. So that's the kind of long-term, big picture analytical piece. And then the other part of the white paper is around policy and funding. And as you have probably seen reported in the media, the general view is that the policy and the funding doesn't match the aspiration in the analytical section of the white paper, and that much more is going to need to be done in order to achieve that. One of the key areas that the white paper focuses on, and incidentally there are about 100, I think even 120 different policy suggestions, many of which are things that we've heard about before. There are a few new things, but mostly things that we've heard about before, that are intended, if you like, to achieve those levelling up ambitions. But one of the key things in the white paper is a commitment to devolution, or a recommitment to devolution. And for large parts of the country, there is a promise of a first devolution deal if parts of the country want it. But for the West Midlands, and this is really the crucial point for this conversation this afternoon, for the West Midlands, we are being offered what's being described as a trailblazer devolution deal. And in the white paper and in subsequent conversations with government officials and ministers, it is very clear that the West Midlands and Greater Manchester have been highlighted as being the two mayoral combined authorities in the country that have demonstrated their competence and their capacity to have special treatment. And on that basis, we've been told that nothing is off the table if we wanted to have a conversation or to negotiate new devolved powers. So that, I believe, is a significant opportunity and prospect for the West Midlands, and something that we can, really start to get our heads around and start to think through, how do we want to seize that opportunity. And so we've begun a process within the combined authority, but working very closely with our local authority partners to work out how best to respond to that opportunity. And in the short term, we've identified a number of principles which are set out in the paper about establishing some clarity with our local and regional partners and their plans as to what it is that we want to take forward. Making sure that we involve local authority partners and indeed other regional stakeholders in the policy development and negotiation processes. Making sure that we secure private sector support, something that the government's very, very keen on in relation to, particularly in relation to co-investment. Making sure that we don't just look at those things that could be devolved to the combined authority, but we look for double devolution, where we can doubly devolve things to local authorities, making sure that we don't suck powers up in the process from local authorities to the combined authority. And finally, making sure that we have a strong emphasis on data and accountability as well, because that again is a big emphasis that the government's putting on this process. So those principles have been agreed by the mayor and the portfolio leaders at their meeting last Friday. We've also now established 20 different work streams around which to develop devolution propositions. Personally, I wish there were fewer, but when you start to list them out, we could have had 45 actually, given the amount of interest there has been in this proposition. I think we've kept them to a relatively manageable number, but we may still seek to streamline them as the process develops. But there are 20, and I'm going to come back to those in just a minute. Then we've also looked at a governance structure, I guess you could call it, and what we're doing by and large is making sure that we use all the existing boards, forums, working groups and so on that already exist, and we are making sure that we use particularly our thematic boards and forums for discussions and not start creating lots of new structures and processes. So to be very clear, this board is, and this conversation is very important as we start to develop ideas as to what needs to go into a devolution deal, and it may well be that this board is important too going forward in finalising and agreeing the kind of propositions that we want to take. So this is a really important meeting. I think it's important to say as part of the process, we're not going to be setting up separate things for people to have conversations about some of the key themes and issues we might want to develop here. And then I guess just to say a few words about the timetable. At the moment, government hasn't set any timetable for a Trailblazer devolution deal, and so we have taken our own suggestion to government, which it seems is meeting approval. So the plan is that we have a relatively short process for developing our various propositions through to May time. We pull that together into a single proposition and take that to the Combined Authority Board meeting on the 10th of June for their approval. And in parallel, we're having bilateral conversations with government departments about some of the issues, but then a final kind of formal negotiation takes place between June and mid-July, and we hope that we get a headline devolution deal sorted by summer recess. So that's the kind of initial process, and then we would expect that there might be subsequent conversations, particularly on the finance side of the deal, between July and the autumn fiscal event. So a final deal is then signed off by the autumn fiscal event. So that's broadly the timetable that we're talking about at the moment, but that is very much subject to change by ministers. And then finally, then just to talk about the work streams and what's particularly relevant to this board. As I said, at the moment, I think we're in a relatively short window where we can come forward with any ideas that we like, that we think that could be on the table for a negotiation. We've identified 3 particular work streams which we think are directly relevant to this board. And they are homelessness prevention, crime, community safety and resilience, and social capital and the social economy. They all have references in the Levelling Up white paper. We also have pre-existing work in these spaces as well. And so we think they are probably the kind of core elements of any Devo proposal that we might want to take forward. Having said that, I don't want to rule anything out. So if people on this call have got other ideas about things that they might want to see on the table, then now would be a good time to speak up about those. Or indeed, people can take the opportunity now in this discussion to drill down a bit on those 3 things. So homelessness prevention, crime, community safety and resilience, and social capital and social economy. So if you've got specific ideas within those, then now would be a good time to flag those ideas. And then colleagues on this call, Claire Darmy, Claire Spencer, Neelam Sundar, who are all on the call this afternoon have responsibility for driving each of those work streams forward, and they can be in contact with you between now and a future meeting in order to thrash out some of those ideas. So, Councillor Carmichael, I think that's all I need to say by way of introduction. Hopefully that's helpful, but ready now for a conversation about anything that I've just said.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Does anybody have any questions first before we open the discussion for more items that we may want to take forward? Do you normally get off that lightly, Ed, on these meetings?
No, not normally, to be honest.
I was going to ask you to list the 20 items that you said you was going to list, but I won't.
If you want me to, I will.
No.
They're in the paper on page 10 and 11.
Claire?
Thank you, Chair. Just in the spirit of not letting Ed or any of us off too lightly, I wonder if an action arising from this might be for us to approach some of the members who couldn't make it today, just to make sure that they're aware that the lines of communication are open around these 3 work streams and any others we might decide in the course of this discussion. But I'm very, very happy to do some of that.
Okay,
that's helpful.
Jonathan?
Just a couple of points on process, if I hope to chair there. That proposition of taking a paper to the June board of the combined authority, given that I suppose that means that you will all have to think about the interaction of that between our own decision-making processes. So I guess, in terms of the reflection here, as I was hearing Ed's presentation, was we'll need to be taking a paper probably to Simon Foster's board in May and going through a process of getting a formal decision to him. And I was just wondering, therefore, the question that arises is, what is the interaction between the deal and everybody's own sign-off processes, and how complex that might get, I guess.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Jonathan. So. And I perhaps should have said, so each workstream lead at the moment has been tasked with 4 things. I'll just very briefly say what they are. First of all, a stakeholder engagement plan, so that they can be very clear as to who they need to involve in conversations. And this is part of the stakeholder engagement plans for the 3 workstreams that I've mentioned. Secondly, a government engagement plan. Because obviously we need to have bilateral conversations with relevant government departments all through this process to be testing out ideas with them and initiating negotiations as far as is possible. Thirdly, and this is to your point, Jonathan, a timetable with some critical milestones within it, and those critical milestones will need to include where external stakeholders, if I can use that term, have got their own decision-making points and moments. So that your board meetings will need to sit very clearly in Claire D's timetable, if you see what I mean, so that each work stream knows exactly what it needs to do to get through to that 10th of June date, so to speak. And then finally, a position paper, which will ultimately bring together the various policy ideas and proposals that are relevant to its particular work stream. So those are the kind of four things that each work stream is currently developing. Does that help, Jonathan, with your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ed. And I guess the only other observation I'd make on the discussion there is clearly, as you said, one of the work streams relates to crime, community safety and resilience. Claire Darmy has raised through Rich the issue of how do we support that, what does that look like, and who do we want to bring in. I would love to be in a position to kind of off the cuff say, here's how we think we can do that. I don't feel I'm quite there yet. I think there are options. That some of the things that will play in are we in the OPCC either a part of or more often facilitate a number of structures such as local criminal justice board, the Violence Reduction Partnership, the community safety work, both with heads of community safety and the West Mid CSP, and of course there are local authority equivalents for those as well. All of those have, to an extent, have that local authority input as well. We know that there is likely to be a structure forming up around violence against women and girls, and a structure forming up at kind of force level, county level, relating to drugs policy as well. So there are a number of places where we can bring material. In terms of supporting it, as I say, we've had initial discussion about some options, whether that is some kind of external support, or whether we can, certainly from the OPCC, either put our hands in our pockets or bring in some sort of staff support. And that does link to the question then, is there a resource behind this? Is government funding the development of a Trailblazer deal at all? Is there any resource that's available to support that?
So I think the simple answer at this point is no. To the kind of your last point, I think we are expected to develop our propositions within our own means as things stand. But it's a good point, actually, Jonathan. I think I might push a little bit harder on that front.
Thank you. Any other questions? Can I just ask then, is there anything anybody wants to see as part of the deal? I mean, for me, homelessness is a priority, and obviously community safety, what Jonathan just said regarding drugs and nighttime enforcement, I think is another one for me as well. We seem to have a bit of a gap, which I spoke to Simon Foster about before, between councils and police, what happens in that gap there, because we have a slight problem with the council blaming the police and the police blaming the council for lack of resources. So those are those for me. Don't know if anybody else has got anything.
Certainly from us, we've got a shopping list, certainly from the PCC side, and just to, I mean, none of this will come as a surprise, I think, to certainly to Ed and to Claire Darmy, who's seen some of our previous submissions, our sort of unilateral submissions to the comprehensive spending review, and also to the various processes around reform of policing governance and the wider role of PCCs. But just to give a sort of flavour of some of those, and noting the commentary about, so not trying to start on anything too controversial, but noting the commentary around where powers should sit, and the discussions relating to double devolution. There are, we would argue from the perspective of the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office, that there are some things that are better coordinated once across the West Midlands. That's not in any attempt to try to usurp the roles of local authorities and their functions, but there are areas around transport and moving vehicle enforcement. We've got one safer travel partnership for the West Midlands. That's a good idea, doing that once. It's not, and we think therefore there are other aspects around antisocial behaviour, antisocial use of the roads, criminal use of the roads, road safety, and public transport, moving vehicle enforcement that are better coordinated once. I've mentioned around drug diversion and prevention. The lead role there clearly sits with local authorities and directors of public health. But if you look at how the kind of criminal economy around drugs works, both at West Midlands county level and West Midlands region level, there are things that should be done there. If we are going to get, one of the things we have talked about many times is provision of secure accommodation and intensive fostering, secure fostering for children in the criminal justice system. The volumes there are so small that it'd be much better done at a West Midlands level than local authority level. In fact, it can't be really done realistically at a local authority level because it's so expensive per child who's in that position. We've talked a lot about in both in the police and crime plan and in other submissions elsewhere to a diversion hub. To offer a very sort of quick background of where that is, it's often people present to policing who have multiple needs. I mean, it's a very obvious point. And one of the tendencies in the system, and our hard-pressed call handlers, perhaps on the 101 and the 9s, are quite comfortable saying that's not a policing matter, that's a housing matter, or that's a local authority matter, or that's a mental health matter. And this individual who has multiple problems, multiple needs, finds themselves being expected to kind of navigate the system. We think there are opportunities for a more co-located, integrated, co-commissioned approach to preventing crime and reoffending, looking at issues around substance misuse, domestic abuse, unemployment, mental ill health, learning needs, etc., and a kind of multi-agency approach where there is, we think that potentially the Trailblazer deal could facilitate progress on those lines. So rather than signposting vulnerable people away into multiple services, we take, there's a kind of collective joint approach to a holistic and tailored service. We're really interested in seeing more problem-solving courts. We've got a bid in with MOJ for a problem-solving court. Having the impetus of a Trailblazer deal behind it would be, I think, a huge fillip to that. Again, kind of approach this with caution because I recognise the sensitivity around it, but some of those really sharp-end interventions around harm prevention in relation to drugs. Again, we are so careful what one says in public, but we are working to try and make sure that the most chaotic and difficult drug users get access to services and get the right clinical intervention. And I think a scope to do that on a bigger scale would be terrific. And also to try and find some routes that bring people into drug rehabilitation services who simply aren't at the moment, and that they sort of code for something some people don't know what I'm talking about. There are some also areas around finances that we would probably want to bring into the discussion. At the moment, the policing seizes quite a lot of cash and assets from serious organised criminals, and it's only allowed to keep a relatively small proportion of those. Whether there would be flexibility for a higher percentage of retention locally, I think that kind of local retention of income, whether it is Proceeds of Crime Act or Police Property Act, or indeed on transport enforcement, might be areas we'd want to try and look at if we're serious about, for example, reducing killed and seriously injured on the roads. We have mentioned it many times, and I recognise again it's a sensitive area around precept flexibility. Westmead's policing precept is a long way lower than everywhere else for all sorts of historic reasons, whether there would be an appetite for exploring that. And I think we're really interested in the discussion about resilience. Our submissions to both the Cabinet Office review of resilience arrangements and in other forums as well has highlighted that nobody who's elected has an overarching responsibility for civil contingencies, preparedness for major incidents, and the response to them. I recognise that is referenced in the Levelling Up white paper, and it talks about a role for the mayoralty there. Obviously, we're in the position of having both a mayoralty and a PCC. So I think we would be really keen to sort of put on paper what we think that should look like. And maybe whether there's some options, whether it seems a tricky one because it's kind of all very primary legislation space. So I'm not quite sure exactly what the expectation would be, but we'd be really keen to have a conversation about what that looks like in practice and how we bring a greater degree of transparency and accountability to preparedness and the response to major incidents. That's kind of it from us, I think, to get us started. I'm sure we'll think of more, but that's to get us started.
No, I actually like that because it actually closes that gap, because I feel as though there's a gap, and I think most of what you said there, well, not most of what you said, but the bits in the middle of what you said close the gap between the council and the police, which is quite good. Thank you. Ed?
So just to come back and say massive thanks, Jonathan. That's really helpful to have such a substantive list of things that we could be considering. It's prompted me just to make a couple of general remarks. So please don't take these as being specific to any of the particular things that you've just said, but it's probably just worth flagging to partners a number of, I don't know, I don't want to call it constraints, because we've been genuinely being told that we should be ambitious, but were just things that you've reminded me that might be worth flagging with people. So first of all, that we need to make any of our propositions directly related to the Levelling Up missions. I think we can be a little bit creative around that, not least when I think about things like energy, the environment. there aren't any levelling up missions in relation to that, and I do think we should push hard that that should be considered. In fact, I think the inclusive growth framework that we're about to come and talk about should really be the framing for the West Midlands approach to levelling up. But the emphasis from government is that this is not a willy-nilly Devo deal where you can have anything you like devolved for the sake of it. It's got to be a Devo deal which is going to address levelling up. So that just gives you some context for how you might want to present some of the ideas that that we've just heard. Secondly, that this is not a spending review, and I know many of the things that you were suggesting, Jonathan, there don't necessarily require funding, but officials have been very clear with us that the spending review has taken place already. Now, I think there are ways around this because not all the money that has been committed at the spending review has been allocated, and so therefore we can still ask for funding to be allocated. But I think we're going to have to be a bit savvy about ways in which existing funding are kind of devolved down to us rather than asking for new money, because there apparently is no new money that can be offered for this. So just to be mindful of that fact as well. And then you mentioned primary legislation as well. I don't think anything's ruled out, and we've definitely got that, or DLUC have definitely got people who are standing ready to prepare secondary legislation should we need secondary legislation or get some ideas across the line. But again, we do just need to be mindful, particularly when it comes to timescales, as to what we're asking for and what that might mean from a legislative point of view.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to come in? No. Should we move on then? Okay. So we move on to, go on. Did you have something to say, Ed?
No, just good. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. So we'll move on to agenda item 7, which is the inclusive growth framework, and Claire's going to introduce that one, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have a short presentation to drive the discussion, but you will all be terribly relieved to know that this is not just going to restate what is in the paper. So what we're hoping to do is share you a bit of so the paper has focused on the rationale for how the inclusive growth framework works and how we have remodeled it. Whereas what we'll focus on in the presentation is some examples of how this can play out when we use it in practice. And we wanted to bring it to you at this point for a handful of reasons. So in the early days of the combined authority, this was actually considered by the full board on a fairly regular basis. So it originally went in September 2018, it went again in May 2019, but we were really conscious that Public Service Reform Board, which really owns this tool and how it is used, hasn't really had a chance to delve into it since then. So given that we had a good set of reasons for revisiting how it worked, we thought this was a really good time to bring it back to the board. What we're also really keen to do is, as we have this discussion and as you go away and think about it afterwards, there will be things that occur to you about ways it could be used that we probably haven't thought of yet. So this is another kind of driver for us today, is trying to come up with some new ideas of how this tool is used in practice. But to kick off, I will hand over to my colleague Anna, as we will take it in turns to speak so that you don't get too bored of somebody's voice.
Thank you, Claire. Good afternoon, everyone. So what we thought we could do first is just kind of refresh our memories on how we define inclusive growth here at the Combined Authority. So inclusive growth as a whole solidified as a concept because even the most successful and productive economies were failing to create the conditions for all in society to thrive. For many years, we've seen reports that economies are growing through measures traditionally such as gross domestic product or gross value added. But what we're not seeing is that trickling down through to our societies and communities where perhaps living costs are increasing. We're seeing that more recently through the rise in energy bills, but we're not seeing wages rise to kind of counteract these costs that people are seeing. So given that economic growth can no longer guarantee that leading of a healthy and more purposeful life, nor the resilience of our places, we need to expand how we measure growth and what we include and incorporate in that measure itself. So we define inclusive growth as a more deliberate and socially purposeful model of growth. We're not just measuring how fast or aggressive it is, but we're also looking at how well it's created and shared across the whole of population and place, and by the social and environmental outcomes it realises for our people. To paraphrase, we want our economies to support the same things that our people do, from climate action to local community activity to the growth of social enterprise. We believe that local places should be reinforced to support these goals. When we consider our inclusive growth framework, in order to reflect this vision in our region, we've created the framework to capture what good growth looks like. The structure of our framework, if we look to the right of our screens, is based on Kate Raworth's donut economics model, whereby the ultimate goal for economic activity is that it works for our people and places, but it does so within the boundaries of our living planet and regenerating what we have, not just constantly using what could run out. The aim here with donut economics is to reflect this principle of balance. We need to meet both needs for us as humans, but also for our planet. Within the framework, we have a range of different fundamentals, we call them the thematic areas, on show. And this infographic that we have is really useful in demonstrating the vision that we have for our economy, how things such as health, well-being, education, and all of our connected communities are intertwined through these things. But a key tenet of donut economics itself is demonstrating where we are or we aren't meeting those needs, both of our planet and of our people. So, in order to effectively demonstrate our trajectory and progress in achieving our inclusive growth outcomes, so meeting those fundamentals, we've updated our inclusive growth framework to show where we are or aren't meeting the need against each. If we start with the basic premise of the donut, the aim is creating a balance where we're meeting the needs of our people within the boundaries of our planet. So when we talk about boundaries, if we borrow Kate Raworth's language here, we need to see those boundaries not as limits, but as aspirations of what we can achieve. If we go first to the very outermost ring of the donut, so those two red segments that we see around the outside, this is what we call the overshoot. So where we're overusing Earth's resources and we're breaching the ecological ceiling. So through carbon intensive activities, the removal of green spaces for urbanisation, for example, all of these things, we're not protecting our environment the way we should be when we're doing those. So we're going beyond that outer ring. If we move within the donut now to what we call the people-focused fundamentals, looking where that shortfall arrow is pointing, that red in there is designed to show where we're not meeting the need to provide the basic necessities needed for people to thrive. So the examples we've incorporated here are around public transport, adequate childcare support available, poor air quality, and not enough social security. So what we see here is if we want the donut to be balanced, and where we want to be is to have no red on show. So the overshoot that we can see around the outside, those segments, and the internal segments, they wouldn't be red, there wouldn't be anything there to show that we are meeting that need. At the moment, this donut model on display to demonstrate our framework is the draft copy. This isn't at the moment wholly accurate to the data that we've pulled together, but in time, the data that we have under the framework and our different indicators will be used to map this effectively to show against each specific fundamental at different spatial levels where we are or aren't meeting the need and where we would like to be. I think I'll hand back over to Claire now for the next part.
You will, thank you. So let's get into the specifics of what the donut is actually telling us. So for each of these thematic areas, what we've tried to do is pull out what we call a bellwether outcome for each one. Now, this is not to say that, for example, reducing CO2 is the only important thing about climate resilience. We know absolutely that that is not the case. But what we are saying is, firstly, this is something we're all going to be keeping an eye on for quite a long time. And the fact that it is salient to our citizens, it's salient to our politicians, it's salient to our other leaders. This really matters. People's attention is a very scarce commodity. And for work like this, which is generational in nature, we need to make sure that this is a tool that can stay the course. There is also a dimension to this, though, about what more does that outcome tell you about what is going on. So I know that if CO2 were reducing at the levels it was supposed to, that would tell us some very useful things about how our economy is changing to meet the climate change challenge. So it tells us a load more about that area of the donut than we would learn from other parts of it. If we move to designing out homelessness as another one, because this is another really key issue for us as PSR board, we know that if actually we are seeing fewer families who end up living in temporary accommodation, we know there are some really good things happening. We will probably know that there is a greater supply of affordable homes and fewer things that are driving people to be homeless in the first place. So this is why it's been really important to us to pick really specific things as these kind of bellwether outcomes. And if you look at those grey stripes at the bottom, this is just to exemplify how we use this in practice with partners. So we know that whenever resources are transferred, there is an opportunity to do inclusive growth. Sometimes it might be really small things, but there is always an opportunity to unlock these different types of value. And what we've got at the bottom is a way of almost kind of categorizing that, because you can't be transformational all the time. We very rarely have the resources that would allow us to do that. But sometimes we absolutely do. Sometimes there is an opportunity to take a piece of investment and to really change how things work. And that sort of split at the bottom helps us to consider when that might be the case. And Anna, if you could flick on one slide. And we will get into the proper data very shortly, but this is just to show you how each bit of the donut is laid out, and just to kind of really show why we've picked particular data for particular points. So we've talked about the bellwether outcomes, and for each of those there is one headline indicator. So there is one thing that we measure that tells us about that outcome. So in the case of climate resilience, that is understandably alignment to the combined authority carbon budget. More on that later. What we also have, though, is up to 4 backing indicators. And this is because, coming back to the earlier point, we don't want to cartoonishly narrow a really wide and varied fundamental. We want to show a bit of a breadth of what is going on within it. So access to green space, and how, if you look at that through an intersectional lens, we know that there are people from communities in our region who have much poorer access to green space than others. Fuel poverty we touched on before. This is an increasingly sharp issue for our residents, and one that is causing a lot of pain. So things like that are really important to bring to the fore. And finally, and Anna will talk a bit more about this later because this is new work coming in now, we also want to have in some community research elements to each bit of the framework, so that we know for each bit of data, we are actually listening to those citizens who are at the sharpest end of this, so we can have some actual human experience built into the donut. But let's move into a few examples of what the framework data tells us, and we will share these out between us as well. So this is the climate resilience fundamental. We are looking at the headline outcome of this fundamental, which is our alignment to the combined authority carbon budget. And this is data from 2019. So at the moment, we know that if we want to hit our carbon budget that takes us into the 2070s, we have to emit around, or stick to, 6.8 megatons of CO2 per annum. But in 2019, we know that we really definitely weren't doing that. We were at 11.1 megatons of CO2 per annum. Thankfully, this is not surprising news. So we know from the modelling that was done for the 5-year plan, which is the current plan we're working to under WM 2041, our climate change strategy. So we know that it will take us almost until the end of that 2041 period to truly be on track with our carbon budget. But that doesn't mean that we can sit here going, oh, phew, got off that hook. No, it means that a lot of the things that will consolidate to make us be on track really have to be happening in the next 5 to 10 years. So we do still feel that that is a really sharp edge. But that is one thing that we can see quite clearly from this, that currently we are overshooting the planetary boundary. Although, however, and this is important, the trajectory is a very good one for this. We are decarbonising our economy. You could just argue that we are perhaps not yet doing it quickly enough. Anna, over to you for the next 2.
Thanks, Claire. So a snapshot on a different part of, or a different section of the framework now, looking at the inclusive economy fundamental. The bellwether outcome for this one is ensuring that household income is increasing for our citizens. And the way that we're measuring that most specifically is in and around the gross disposable household income that our citizens are receiving. Within this fundamental, we are also measuring alongside that the proportion of citizens in the 7 Met area also earning the real living wage as it's defined by the Living Wage Foundation for someone working full time. So if we focus first on the middle column of the table, what we can see here is against the real living wage, the majority of our local authority areas are performing well and our citizens are in receipt of more than that in terms of their wage. However, one of the interesting things about the donut and the way that the tensions play out with this is if we compare that to part of the equality fundamental, so looking here in and around the average cost of childcare in a week, or biannually, sorry, what we can see is once we then compare the gross disposable household income and against real living wage, but then we add in something like childcare costs on top, we're seeing quite a different picture across the region. So what we wanted to do here was demonstrate some of the tensions that we have, but also showing that although in some respects, in terms of earning a real living wage, there is success, we can't look at that in isolation. We need to consider another cost such as childcare, which is a reality for the majority of our citizens, in how this can then alter what their day-to-day spending is and how that might impact their choices and their day-to-day life in terms of employment as they go forward. So the next one here is in and around our power, influence and participation fundamental, where the bellwether outcome for this one centres around whether there's a positive perception of influence and agency amongst our citizens. So do they feel they have control over what's happening in their local area? We also analyse the voter turnout gap and participation in protests, petitions and public rallies across the region. And what we can infer from this is kind of a general feeling and understanding of how people are in terms of do they think that they have a say in democracy going on locally. But we're well aware that measures such as voter turnout and participation in protests, for example, are quite traditional forms of data. And over the years, we have seen a decline in some of those activities. So what we wanted to do with this fundamental is really explore something different. And what we've chosen to do here in consultation with colleagues in public health is consider whether something along the lines of vaccination take-up can be used to give an indication of public trust in our institutions. Again, not looking at this solely in isolation, and we're keen to hear your thoughts about whether this is an appropriate viewpoint, but really considering what vaccination records can tell us about public trust is something that we're keen to look into. And I think it's reasonable, following on from, you know, the likes that we've seen in COVID and that vaccination take up and around trust in information coming forward, that this is perhaps an untapped area that we could look into more with the donut, but we're really keen to hear your views on this today. I'll hand back over to Claire now.
And finally, and those of you who are fans of Combined Authority Board will have seen that a paper on air quality has been through in the last few weeks. Now, we've chosen this one, which is not the headline indicator of the health and well-being section, because we want to show that even though air quality as a discipline is sitting under our environment team as a combined authority, the reason we care about exposure to particulate matter in its PM 2.5 form is about health and well-being. We are only caring about this as institutions because of the impact it has on the health of human beings. And so one of the ways that air quality work, which has been led and supported by WM Air at the University of Birmingham, they have tried to model the impact of the PM 2.5 particulate pollution on a wider population. So they've done this on a ward by ward basis. And if you look into the papers, which I can share with you if you're interested, there is a heat map of the entire region that shows the relative exposures that they have modelled. And you can see here that, you know, if you looked at the average for the combined authority area, you would still be pretty troubled because you would still be looking at an exposure level that was in the majority. in terms of the number of number of wards that are over that 10 micrograms per cubic meter, which is the measure that they are using as a sort of safe level of PM2.5, although I will stress that that is still a very unknowable thing. They do not truly know whether it is a safe level. But then if you look at it on a local authority by local authority basis, you can obviously see that, you know, Solihull and Coventry still pretty serious, but looking a little bit better on air quality. Sandwell and Birmingham, you've got a much more kind of serious level of modelled exposure happening. Now, I will just put two quite heavy caveats on this. This is modelled. So we will all know from the communities we know, from places, obviously, Councillor Carmichael, that you represent. Everybody knows where there are parts of where they live where air pollution is really, really bad. And that can even happen in wards that are looking good on this. So I would put that there. And it is being modelled. So actually, it's not a replacement for on the ground measuring of air quality. But what this does do is it gives us a sense of, if we are looking for places where the kind of value of the economic investment we want to unlock is cleaner air, we have here a guide that says these are the places that need us most to think about cleaner air and what we can do with our investments to unlock that as an outcome. So this is both sobering data, but also incredibly helpful data when it comes to how we prioritise in that space. And to wrap us up, Anna is just going to tell you a little bit about the community research element of this and how that will balance this work that we're doing.
Thanks, Claire. So the framework data can give us some really, really rich insight into what's happening across our region and deep down into local communities themselves. But at the end of the day, the data that we can get online and through these reports is a flattening of reality. So what we would like to do through a community research survey is go out to members of the public through community researchers out and about in their local area, speaking to a select group of people to gain insight and the lived experience from our citizens around different parts of each of the fundamentals in relation to the framework. We're really keen to make sure what we think is happening on the ground for citizens. And one example that we can give with this is, for example, traffic data may tell us that an area is particularly safe, despite it being by a busy road, because there is a very low amount of road traffic collisions or serious accidents. But a family with 2 young children, for example, might say, actually, no, I don't find this very safe. The park's across the road, but I don't feel I can get there at certain parts of the day due to the volume of traffic on the road, for example. So matching up those 2 bits of data is really, really important when we're planning our policy and investment in an area to say, OK, this is what we know from the data. This is how it's matching up with our citizens, or this is where there's some tensions that we need to explore further. And then at the heart of inclusive growth is the voice of our citizens. So this is something we really want to make sure is repeatable and transferable across the piece. It will be at 3-year intervals, we hope, instead of annually. And that's just to make sure that, you know, as Claire said, this is an intergenerational piece of work with inclusive growth. So by doing it over a slightly longer time period, there's the real chance to see what's working, what perhaps hasn't worked so well, and speak to people in their local area. So I'll leave it there. I'll drop my sharing my screen and hand back to you, Claire, if that's all right.
That's great. Thank you, Anna. And yeah, it is very much over to you now, Chair. So any thoughts or questions or homework for us to do, we're happy to do a combination of all 3.
Thank you. Can I just ask about that particular slide you showed us with the model with regards to the diesel particulates? Mm-hmm. If it's just a model, where do you actually get your figures from? There's got to be some foundation somewhere to those figures that you receive.
Yeah, so it is based on, so you'll know, Councillor Carmichael, that at different points around your borough, and this is true of all of the others as well, there are places where the air quality is being actually measured, whether that's happening annually or consistently or anything else. And that is essentially being extrapolated to cover a wider population. So trying to kind of draw the gaps between it. So there's a basis for doing this, because what this population weighted exposure measure does is it lets you say we can estimate that roughly this number of people are being affected by air quality that is this poor. And so I think they've estimated for the whole Seven Met area, I think it's 1.2 million people. So that's definitely not a small number of people. But yeah, you are right. At its very heart, what they start with is the real air quality data that is being collected. And then, of course, things like wind speeds. There are other considerations that factor into where poor air does and doesn't go and how quickly it dissipates. So they are doing with what they have at WM Air, they're doing a decent job. But I think, so the head of environment, I can almost hear in my ear now say there is absolutely no replacement for on the ground modelling, because you will also know that, if you are a toddler, for example, and you're walking along the pavement, your air quality is much worse than if I were a 6'2" dude. You are going to be above where the air quality is worse. So we know that even tiny changes like that really do change the experience of people. So that's why we're caveating it so heavily. But yeah, that would answer your question, hopefully.
Yeah, it does. So can we measure more frequently then? I suppose that's the next question.
I would say without promising things that I definitely don't have the resources to promise, and Ed may want to come in specifically on this, there is always that opportunity, and I know that is an aspiration. But Ed, maybe I should hand over to you because you were there at board when it was discussed.
Thank you, Ed.
So yes, at the last Combined Authority board meeting, we agreed that there will now be created a regional air quality framework in order to work much more closely together on these issues, particularly around particulate matter, which blows further and faster than nitrous oxides. And part of the explicit reason for doing that is that if we work more collaboratively together across our local authorities, we can find significant efficiencies in the way in which we measure and monitor. So at the moment, we're all buying our own air quality monitors. Their system isn't joined up, and it's particularly expensive when we do it in a kind of piecemeal fashion. But if we now work together on that, we can procure air quality measurement systems in a much more effective way, which we would hope leads to better measuring and monitoring.
Okay, thank you. I'll just bring the others in. So there's Jonathan.
Right, Rich speaking here. So just, I suppose, one ask and two observations. Police and Crime Commissioner in his Police and Crime Plan had a joint section with the Mayor, and one of the joint commitments they made was around securing social value and a sort of review of approaches towards securing social value. So if offline we're able to pick up, because we're keen as some of the anchor institutions to be as aligned as we can with others on this, to have sort of greater clout, if I'm frank. And then just two quick observations. I found the vaccine data really interesting. The only thing I'd be interested in, and this might be something about offline, is how age plays into that as well, with our cities being typically younger and our and bits of the Black Country, and Solihull, etc., being older as well. And is that having an influence on vaccine that might not translating through into general agency? And then just one final observation. I think these models we're all quite subscribed into. Is going to be any plan when we're looking at the Devo deal of running the deal through some sort of framework, so we can? I'm seeing nodding heads, but I would raise anyway to make sure that we're ticking the boxes as far as that's concerned.
Shall I come back on that, yeah, Chair, if that's okay? So. Yeah, let's start with the vaccination data. So it won't surprise you that, given we've all been living the same shared nightmare, that the idea for looking at this as a measure of trust came through the COVID vaccination data rather than the MMR, because actually there was such a very clear expression of different communities. And you're right, there is an absolute age dimension to the COVID data in particular for all sorts of reasons. But it was really clear that for certain communities, that even if they were the same level of deprivation when it came to the indices of multiple deprivation, so take Castle Vales and Bordesley Green, for example, there was probably 30 percentage points difference between their vaccination uptake. So there was something other than poverty which explains that. And you're right, age is absolutely a part of that, because I would guess that, and it is, Castle Vale is an older place than Bordsley Green, but I think there are other things going on relating to trust in what you were told by institutions about vaccines being safe and desirable for you from a health perspective. So I think when we talked about this to public health, their caveat was, well, actually COVID data is really good at the moment, but obviously this may not be a thing forever. You're certainly not going to be getting daily data forever, but MMR, you can track it further back in time. It reflects some of those same societal trends around trust. And so maybe that would be a more reliable thing that will endure into the future. So that explains why we made that shift on that one. On the social value, yes, let's get in touch. I'll pick up with you after the meeting, because we'd be really happy to help. And we're obviously having similar adventures within the combined authority as well. And finally, on the Devo deal, we have been working to work out whether we can use the inclusive growth framework, which is in itself based on the Sustainable Development Goals, as a way of patching the missing missions of the Levelling Up white paper, particularly around climate change, but also some other key areas. And so, yeah, our intention is to basically pitch to government to say, well, we already have a definition of levelling up and it's kind of this, but this is how we would blend it with what you're expressing to actually use as a lens to evaluate our Devo asks. So that's definitely something we're designing up at the moment, but we are not the be all and end all. If you want to be part of working that through and helping us, we'd be very grateful for that, because this is definitely a bit of an art form, and the more people who are in the designing, I think, the better.
Thank you.
Very helpful, thanks.
Neil?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Thanks, Anna. I thought that was it's a really interesting and contemporary model, and if I say so, very well presented. I can see the passion around it. What's interesting for me from a fire service perspective is around the way you have formulated it. It gives me sort of great confidence, because we're just developing a framework which is very similar, which is rolled around an ESG framework. So it's pretty much what you've got there, but you haven't enabled the governance, and I can understand why, because it's outside facing. But what's interesting for me, a couple of things, that it gives me a warm tummy feeling that I'm on the same sort of track, because it's right, a real contemporary approach. But then secondly as well for me is there's a lot of links in between what you've put there in that model, in the donut model, that what I've also proposed within our framework. So what I'm going to just make sure that we are attuned and aligned, so that both strategies are working together. So that's my first point. The second point is I absolutely see there's alignment, a correlation between this and the 20 strategic asks that Ed mentioned before. And I just wonder, in one of the 20 asks, it just says net zero. I'm just wondering if that's broad enough, because net zero is almost like the phrase of the moment, and perhaps we need to expand that to, I don't know if we use the word sustainability, but do we need to expand that? And then my final point is, across all of these things, Claire, I don't know if you mentioned it a couple of minutes ago, so apologies if you did. I'm assuming we're going to undertake a benchmarking exercise, because the key elements of this, from my understanding, and as I evolve my sort of development around this, is that it's almost like, yeah, we can put these frameworks in place, but it's almost like the so what. And to start off give us ourselves a good position to almost demonstrate the value that we extract, because that, to me, that's like the devolution of, okay, the so what, this is what we've done. It links into the fire, the police colleagues and their points around, what's next. So thank you. Really enjoyed that presentation. Took a lot from it. So thank you very much. Thanks, Kerry.
Thank
Cool.
you.
Shall I quickly just
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. So just let's start with your last point first. Yeah, this framework is only as relevant as it dictates that we change something about what we do. You know, so you said at the beginning, this feels really close to what you're trying to achieve. And we did speak to your colleague, Tom Embry, last week as well in that spirit. But yeah, this is something that so many places are trying to capture about how do you get economic activity to actually care about a broader section of things, to actually hold ourselves responsible and to actually make sure that public sector objectives and economic objectives are not different ones, that we can all aim for the same stuff together, and it's just that we play slightly different roles. So we're very open to how other partners do this thing, because we don't need to police, so to speak, your language. It's like, well, if you want to do the same things, great, like we can see where the overlaps are and let's make sure that we have as much overlap as possible. But we totally get that different parts of public services, different parts of the regions, different groups of people, they've got some of their own language for this, and we've got to be lively to that if we're going to do partnership. So we're very keen to be as helpful as possible there, because it is ultimately what we do that matters. On the net zero point, you're absolutely right. Actually, that relates specifically to the carbon budget element of climate resilience. But actually, we know that biodiversity net gain, we know that clean air, you know, we know that building a circular economy, these are all things that technically don't fall within that net zero purview. Some of them might be helpful, like things not flooding is good for carbon emissions, but on the whole there are other reasons not to have things flood, you know, for lots of very good human reasons. So you're absolutely right that we have to be really careful with our language, because otherwise we will end up squeezing out things that are really, really important about what we do. So yeah, let's make sure that, you know, so what I've offered to Tom is that if you want us to come and talk to you guys at West Midlands Fire Service and do some, because one thing that Anna and I do as part of our partner service is if people just want to think about inclusive growth in their space and their main opportunities and what kind of lens they can put on it, we're always really happy to do kind of like workshops and discussions and anything else you might need. So very happy to pick some of that up as well, if that would be at all useful.
Yeah, and Claire, just on the back of that, I've just actually just employed a middle manager who's going to evolve this. So let's connect up outside here and start that conversation.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next agenda, Claire, can I just ask, so just so for clarification really, if the local authorities monitor and they feed that information into you, or do you monitor? I'm not clear.
So it's a bit of a blend, councillor. So some of the things, so for example, if you looked at recycling rates, for example, we will take the local authorities' targets for their own recycling rates as the target. Like, we don't set that for the local authorities because that's not really our role to do that. And then we just look at what tonnage is going through. And a lot of the data we're drawing on is actually from national sources. You know, obviously the census data is now, as you'll expect, 10 years out of date and is increasingly less useful, but there's other more regular data that we draw on. So on the whole, we try not to, we don't need to like ask anybody for it, because you are already reporting it into different government departments and we're drawing it down from national data sources. There will be a handful of exceptions to that, but mostly that stuff we can get out of Transport for West Midlands directly, because they are such a big collector of transport and connectivity related data, so we don't need to go to central government for that. But yeah, on the whole, we don't tend to make those asks of local authority partners. And as you'll really know through, you know, your Vision 2030 work, Solihull the same. Like, there's different ways that you're measuring things, and that's kind of fine too, because local leadership really matters on this stuff. So yeah, we've got a bit of a blend.
Right. Okay. So how often do you pull that information together?
So it's supposed to be every year. So what we've looked at quite closely is how quickly those different bits of data refresh themselves, because some things, so if you look at the families in temporary accommodation, for example, that is quarterly data. So technically we could refresh that every quarter, but not every other bit of data in that section of the framework is a quarterly thing. So we've almost got to refresh it at the rate of the slowest data point. So that is going to be an annual thing, we think. And as Anna says, there's also the community research bit, which we think there is value in having a slightly longer time window on, and that would refresh at a 3-yearly rate.
Okay. So just my last question. So All the slides that you've shown us today, there's individual for each local authority. So, for example, Sandwell, you'll have all that information along all those slides just for that local authority.
Yeah, and again, it does vary from data to data because a lot of data exists at local authority level, and often we've created the CA data by merging the 7 METs together, so that in most cases it definitely exists. When it comes to, say, the carbon budget, for example, we have I mean, I've worked it out. Like, I can show you the data for it. I can work out what the carbon budgets are for each local authority. But in some ways it's less helpful because there's definitely an argument, and this happens internationally, for, well, if an area is more deprived, surely we should grant it more carbon budget because that is actually what it deserves to kind of like to have that kind of escalation in wealth. But that's not a discussion that's been had either locally or at CA level yet. And you can obviously reproduce that to a certain extent by just changing where your investment goes. So I think while you can definitely do it for nearly all the data points, there's a question about how useful some data is when you push it lower. GDP is another really good example of this. The lower down you push it, the less it kind of tells you. So we're kind of conscious of which data works best at which levels. And just a final small thing, one thing we did for Kingshurst in Solihull, which is part of our inclusive growth in action work that helped to inform all these changes, is we made a donut for Kingshurst, which is a town in the north of Solihull. So we used very local data for that. And that is very possible to do, but that's taught us some quite valuable lessons about, well, here's what you should do if it's regional level, here's what you should do locally, and here's what you should do hyper locally. So we've definitely got basically some data substitutes we can use at all levels. So yeah, really happy to look into any of this. We do work quite closely with your team in Sandwell on the Inclusive Economy board. So if there's anything you'd like to see coming through that, we can definitely do some stuff.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to see things at a local level.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I just needed clarification. So is there any other questions? No, so we'll move on to agenda item 8, which is the annual performance planning and update. And that's over to Claire, please. Claire Darmer.
Different Claire.
Yeah.
We've quite fair few Claires in the combined authority. So thank you, Chair. So this is the report that starts at page 59 of your pack. I'm going to assume that everybody has had a chance to read through that. I'll just pull out some main points. So as a reminder, we have a statutory requirement as a combined authority to have an assurance framework. The combined authority board approved our framework in July 2020, and with that set the requirement that PSR board, this board, has the requirement to approve and monitor the deliverables of the portfolio. So you'll see in the paper a review of the current high-level deliverables that we're working against, and I'll just pick out a couple of headlines from that in terms of areas that haven't progressed quite as we had intended. One is around a voluntary community faith and social enterprise resilience fund that we were due to build a business case around that. And because of capacity issues within our team, we have been unable to progress that, although we have a different route of looking at that through the Trailblazer devolution deal and the social economy work stream that Claire Spencer will be leading going forward. The second one to point out is the civic leadership programme. Take up from agencies is lower than we had anticipated on that, so I guess it's a bit of a plea that just to double check that your organisation it has got a place on that. There may be an opportunity for us to part fund or have a conversation about funding some of those places as part of the pilot initiative that I think a number of partners were signed up to when we put the bid in to receive this work. A third area that's not progressed quite as quickly as we had anticipated is the Inclusive Growth Portal and microsite. That's linked, or we thought that was prudent to link it to a refresh of the overall Combined Authority website development, and that in itself is a big job and has been delayed. We do anticipate that that will be up and running before the Commonwealth Games, and hopefully the Inclusive Growth Portal will be ready to go and will be able to be utilised by partner agencies in the forthcoming months. And then the fourth area that hasn't developed strongly or quite in the way that we intended is the Inclusive Growth Corridors Board, which has been superseded by the Capital Integration Board. So they're the four areas that we've been not progressing quite in the way that we had anticipated, with a bit of an explanation as to why. You've had regular updates on a range of the other activity, which, as you can see from the board report, is progressing very well in lots of areas. We are therefore proposing 13 new high-level deliverables framed in a slightly different way this time. So our budget has been built around these proposed high-level deliverables, and that was agreed at the Combined Authority Board meeting in February. Our 13 new high-level deliverables all reference fairer, with the approach that we are managing the fairer, greener, healthier agenda, and that our part of the directorate is responsible for delivering against the ambition that we create a fairer West Midlands. 4 of those 13 high-level deliverables belong, if you like, to the Inclusive Growth, Inclusive Communities portfolio. So that's the portfolio that Councillor Jones, the Deputy Leader in Birmingham and the Vice Chair of this board, is responsible for. And the remaining 9 high-level deliverables are directly responsible or directly accountable to this board. So the proposal is that the 4 that are accountable to the Inclusive Communities portfolio will be reported here for information, because they are part of how we create a fairer West Midlands, although the accountability lies with Councillor Jones rather than this board. All of the new high-level deliverables reflect activity that has been ongoing. Some of it has been revised and reshaped slightly, but it is all largely very similar activity to that which we have been ongoing. What sits behind this, and some of it is pulled through the report, is where you can see those links to the corporate strategy, which was of course agreed at our Combined Authority Board back in the summer. Or autumn. So I'll pause there if anybody's got any comments or questions.
And that was very well summarised, Claire, from all that, to be honest. Doesn't look as though anybody's got any questions.
So for the purpose of the minutes, if we can take those high-level deliverable, the new ones as approved and the previous ones as noted.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Claire. So move on to the next agenda item, which is homelessness task force update, and that's over to Nina, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you've got a double act from Jean and I this afternoon. Yeah, she is. Yeah, I'm just going to bring a couple of slides up because it kind of helps us to explain what we've been doing. So if you just bear with me. So hopefully you should be able to see that now. Yeah, so I think it's fair to say since we last reported to board, we have been busy as per. But what we wanted to do this afternoon was really just to summarise some of the work that we've been doing across our several task groups, and specifically around what we're doing in the space of children and families, and kind of our work looking at the number of families we've got in temporary accommodation and what we can do to reduce that, but also the time spent in temporary accommodation and how we can get early help to families to avoid, evictions and routes into TA. We're also starting to look at work around young people through one of our task groups, and about what more we can do to design out youth homelessness, and of course our work on rough sleeping. So we're going to kind of like do a bit of a double act and just sort of show you some of the work we're doing and have done, and then some of the work we want to take into 22 and 23. Oh, our areas of focus, as I've just explained, has been around those 3 cohorts, and that's been really consistent since we kind of launched the task force. And what we have now are 3 particular task groups that really focus on each cohort to really think about, what's the nature and scale of that homelessness, because I think what we've been keen to do in the task force is not to kind of lump all homelessness in one, because it is really nuanced, and what we can do about it is very different, and there are different statutory duties across those three cohorts. So of course we've got our rough sleeping task group. Last year we set up or revamped our children, families and young people task group, and more recently we have set up a domestic abuse and homelessness subgroup, because we really want to kind of hone in on kind of why is it that certain life circumstances result in homelessness, because we don't actually believe that is the inevitable, but for some reason that it happens, and we need to understand why, so that we can really think about kind of that early help for cohorts and what more we can do in that universal space. And we are very clear that when we are looking at these cohorts, we are looking at it through that lens of homelessness, not the other gambit of challenges. So I'm going to start with the rough sleeping task group. So as you know, we are all aware, and we've got it all kind of etched into our brains now, that we are all working to that government pledge of ending rough sleeping by this Parliament by 24-25. Before Christmas, we were really pleased in the spending review to see that a multi-year rough sleeping initiative programme had been announced. And what we've been doing now with our 7 local authorities and us at the CA is we have been working very, very hard to get in our RSI bids over the last sort of 2 months of this year. And we've really tried to kind of look at what the CA can bid for to add value to the work of our local authorities, and making sure that whatever it is we are bidding for, it is not in competition with our local authorities, that it will help their pathways to ending rough sleeping in each local authority. So what we did last week, because it was the deadline, we've managed to submit our bids now, which really focus on kind of our targets around ending rough sleeping and what we're going to do as a collective to achieve that. And last week you will have seen probably in kind of local press, the rough sleeping data for 2021 was released across our 7 local authority Mets. Together, when you look at our data, we have had a slight increase. However, it is nowhere near where it was in the peak of 2018. And we also know that, you know, the 2020 figures, you know, was against that backdrop of the Everyone In initiative. It was during the pandemic. And of course, in 2021, Everyone In kind of petered off. And there were exceptional kind of circumstances, and the environment, you know, was challenging. However, what this tells us is that we can't take our eye off the ball. And if we want to end rough sleeping, then we really do need to come together to really think about it. So what we've been doing now with an organisation called the Centre for Homelessness Impact, who have been commissioned by Dulloch to think about how do we end rough sleeping? You know, how do we operationalise that goal? So what we've been doing since January is working with the centre to really think about, well, what does a data-led definition of ending rough sleeping in our region look like? And how will we know that we've achieved this? Because at the moment, the way that we are measuring rough sleeping as a country is really crude. We are doing, you know, snapshot counts. And what we do know is that, you know, rough sleeping is not a point in time. You know, you could have a 0 count one night and it could go up to 1, 2, 3, 5 the next night. So we really need to think about it in a more sort of nuanced way. So what we are looking at with the Centre for Homelessness Impact is about how, firstly, you know, we're all about prevention in the task force. So it's about saying what can we do as a region to ensure that in the first instance we always prevent rough sleeping. And if we can't prevent it from happening, how do we make sure it's rare? How do we make sure it's a brief occurrence? And how do we make sure that it doesn't occur again for individuals? So what we are doing now with the Centre for Homelessness Impact is thinking about, what do we mean by those 4 concepts? What's the definition? And then what metrics will we use to kind of really measure our progress around ending rough sleeping? And I'm pleased actually to announce that today, government announced some early adopters for this work, and they've said that the West Midlands, they want to work with the West Midlands around really kind of coming up with this definition. And I think I want to be clear in that this isn't about us changing our goalposts. we are still committed to ending rough sleeping, but this is about having a clearer plan on how we are going to get there. Because what we don't want is to get to 24, 25, and then we sort of say, oh, we haven't got there, because we saw that back in the early noughties, and I don't think as a region we want to be there. So that's sort of in a nutshell what we're doing. In terms of the Rough Sleeping Initiative programme, we are due to get our decisions, I think, kind of early May. So hopefully by the next board we'll be able to sort of say how the region has fared around that. But yeah, so that's our work on rough sleeping. I'm going to now hand over to Jean, and she's going to talk about our work on kind of children and families and young people.
Thank you, Neelam. Are you all good? Thank you. As long as you don't expect me to do any of the techie stuff.
Oh, no,
right? So,
yeah.
Thank you very much. So, yeah, yes, both Neelam and I were on the meeting earlier, the DLUC meeting, and had Secretary of State Michael Gove was actually speaking, and Eddie Hughes, and yeah, it's nice to hear that we were one of 5. And I just use that as a little example of the collaboration, Councillor Carmichael, and how as independent chair I'm kind of so privileged to be able to chair this task force, because to get the agreement, there are 5 nationally, but we made sure that we secured all of our cabinet members from our 7 local authorities, members advisory group, all came together. Were they happy with taking this forward, this proposal? Across our officers and the voluntary sector and the business sector, was the steering group, were they happy with working with CHI and taking this forward? So when everyone agreed, and the mayor as well, and when we wrote to the DLUC and said, look, we would like to be considered, if you're taking this forward, we'd like to be considered as early adopter. And we all knew that actually everybody was up for it. And I think that to me just kind of exemplifies the level of collaboration really on looking at this really, really kind of challenging and sort of, wicked issues. And I think just looking at all of the things that Claire presented on inclusive growth and the framework, every single one of those 8, I know we are one of the outcomes on the affordable places, but actually sort of designing out homelessness is an outcome for all of those. Every single one of those elements is really important if we are going to help prevent homelessness in our region. And if we're going to make our inclusive universal space through growth or through improvement or whatever, inclusive for everyone, because we see homelessness as the ultimate exclusion. And I think if we make that universal space inclusive for everyone, then we are going to design out there. So yeah, so children, families and young people, as you know, a lot of government attention is on rough sleeping. It's the visible homelessness. That's where all the resources are going. It's all about crisis, it's all about ending, and we all want to do that. But it also, behind that, masks the thousands of families that are in temporary accommodation and don't have a home of their own, and the impact that then has on children and young people and moving on. And it's interesting that in the levelling up missions, the 12 missions, the one that's about housing is creating, renters will have secure pathways to ownership. Well, wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't it be lovely if you had a secure pathway to a home, actually, as a starting point? And I think ownership, yeah, lots of people, ultimately that might be your goal. But actually, a lot of the people that we all work with, that we say, just something that's safe, that's secure, that's sustainable, that you can afford. And actually, if somebody else is a really good landlord and is managing it well, then a lot of people are very, very happy with that. So I think, yeah, levelling up, that's great. But some of the definitions of what levelling up looks like come from a place where there is particular perceptions, I think, of what aspirations are about. So children, families and young people, we've got a task group, as Neelam said, and it's chaired by Andy Caldrick, who's the chief exec of Birmingham Children's Trust. So it's really good to have that join up between the housing folks and also people that work in children's services and health as well. It's a really, really good group, and it's really been looking at, we commissioned some research from MEL, and it's really been looking at what's the experience of families in TA in particular, and we know that we would all rather not have to have TA at all, but we know that if we're going to have it, then let's get the really good stuff. Let's get the best possible experience for those families and children. And at the time that they did the research with 3,500 plus, we know that plus has got bigger and bigger actually across our region, and the number is higher now. And so it's fun. But it was really interesting to see, you know, the demographics as well. And another time we can look at that. But we are looking, we talk about families and households, but we are looking at predominantly women and children. And we are looking at disproportionately women and children from certain ethnic groups. So, you know, when we actually see, and again, we look, you know, Claire's points around inclusive growth and what we mean, then homelessness is similar. Homelessness is a massive equalities issue. Let's make no mistake about that. It's a huge equalities issue. I think what was also interesting was that, you know, you don't see it. It's not as visible. And it's great that there is a statutory responsibility and that you won't see women and children, families on our streets in this country. Hopefully, thank goodness. But the other issue is that you think, okay, well, that's great. But then there is also that fearfulness. And what came out of the research was that we know for singles that they will often try, particularly young people, that will try to sort everything out themselves before they come and ask for help, and particularly statutory help. We weren't quite sure about families because actually there is more statutory help there. But what the research was showing, that is also the case for families, that actually they will try to do everything before they come particularly to a statutory hub or a statutory place. And there's all sorts of reasons for that. Sometimes it's worrying about you being thought as a bad parent. Sometimes it's because you haven't been good enough. You think sometimes it's where your children might get taken away from you. And there's all those kind of things that fuel people's kind of preparedness to actually seek help at an early stage. And when we're talking about upstream early intervention, prevention, and you know, as far up as we can go, those things are really important because we need to be able to have places that people feel they're not going to be judged, they're not going to be stigmatized, and they can get early assistance and early advice so that if it is possible to prevent that homelessness, that we can do it at that early stage. And so I think this research and the feedback has been really, really important to kind of get a better, deeper understanding of what are the drivers and how do people end up in that position. Because we know even at 56 days for Homeless Reduction Act, statutory homelessness, it's pretty late in the day. And often it's much later than that by the time that people come to us. So building that trust, having those places where people can go for early non-stigmatized advice, I think is really important. When we are, it's why this board is so important. You know, this is public service reform. These kind of lessons are really important for all of us, aren't they, to understand how do we ensure that there is that trust and that we use across sectors those best placed to provide the intervention at the right time. Neelam also mentioned domestic abuse. Now we know wicked issue, and certainly, you know, police and Claire Darmy and all are involved in all different kind of levels. Our lens is very much looking at, but why is it always related to homelessness? Why are the two so interlinked? Great, if we didn't have domestic abuse and we could sort that out, that would solve. But why then is it the double whammy of homelessness as well? So it is particularly through that lens that we're looking at. Why do we compound it in any way? Do we things by, you know, for example, if we don't accommodate perpetrators, if they don't have any priority, does that put more pressure on those, on the family that are in the home? So we're looking at all those kind of things, and we're in some very challenging, contested spaces, but we're having really, really good discussions about that in the DA task group. Thanks, Neelam. Next one. So we're also, the Children, Young People, Families group are looking at an overall action plan for the year. And there's a lot of things in it, but we're kind of grouping them within these areas. So really looking at this information, advice and guidance piece. And at the last task force steering group, we were looking at both information, advice and guidance, which is one of our 5 priority areas in terms of designing out. It sounds like it was the easy one, but I think it's probably one of the hardest. And we were also looking at that within the context of what does that look like in the universal space? And it used to be that we had lots of IAG in the universal space. We had lots of citizens advice bureaus. That they were publicly funded. We would all feel quite comfortable going to a CAB and asking a question because it wasn't stigmatized. But funding and situations have changed, and there isn't necessarily that kind of level of information, advice and guidance in that universal space anymore. And we're very privileged, very lucky to have the chief exec of the Citizens Advice Bureau in Coventry, who also kind of coordinates the regional CAB offers to sit on the task force and really help us explore and help provide further data and information to us about who is attending CABs now, what are the issues, because often that is the early stage of homelessness. So they're seeing, you know, inquiries about that relate to debt and poverty and all those things hugely increase. And we can see that's probably going to get worse as the sort of tsunami of debt comes toward us as cost of living increases. So so again, looking at how do we have that universal space there? Again, early help, what does that look like? And really learning from all, you know, there's so much good stuff going on in different parts of our region, but bringing it together and learning from each other. And supply, I mean, yeah, it'd be great if it was a pathway to ownership, I'm sure, but actually supply really, really critical, and supply that's genuinely affordable. And I think this is across the piece for families, for those that want to work. Councillor Carmichael, you've just, you know, supported a development in Sandwell, which is, you know, groundbreaking in relation to ensuring that young people can live and work and be benefit free. That's fantastic, and we want to see that elsewhere in our region as well. So it's been able, I think, to try these things out and do some groundbreaking stuff, and hopefully, you know, the devolution deal can maybe help us do some, you know, get some resources to do a few of those things. And yeah, talked about the other things as well. Thanks, Neelam. So young people, again, really interesting. Everybody's had a hard time during COVID. Young people, every kind of thing they've been involved with, their education, their social relationships, their employment, their housing, all sorts of things has been compromised really, really badly. And also, if it's not bad enough, those that don't have a family home to remain in, they had their £20 taken off. So did everybody else. But for young people, it pushed them below destitution level. So their universal credit living allowance is £59.38 a week. Who in this room, in this virtual room, could live on £59.38 a week, let alone those with the least experience of how to manage that? So we are working with Loughborough University, who have done a lot of work on minimum income standards over the years, and also have worked with Heriot Watt University and Professor Suzanne Fitzpatrick around destitution levels. So Professor Donald Hirsch from Loughborough leads the work on minimum income standards, and they've done quite a lot already on young people over the years. For example, you know, the percentage of young people that are 18 to 25 that remain in a family home now compared to even 2015-18, significant change, which is fine if you've got a family home that you can remain in, but not so great for the others. So they are going to, the combined authority, Neelam has managed to keep some money, and we are now going to be working with Loughborough University and commissioning some research which really looks at those links between, you know, income, accommodation and employment, because we don't want to trap young people in benefits at all. It's not good for them, it's not good for the future, not good for anybody else. But it is, if you really push it down, if you think you really can't live on this £59, is that going to help you work if you've got nowhere to live, or is actually that going to make it more difficult? So this is what the research, I think, will really be like a very powerful insight into that for our region. Thank you very much. Does that mean, Neelam, or have I got another one?
Just the last one.
Oh, and this last one. So and this again just it's a kind of, because we say no recourse to public funds, and as we know, it's much you know, has to be more kind of refined than that, because it within that context, there's lots of people, those that are EU nationals, there are those that may be refugee status, there are those that have just lost their way, there are those, all sorts of reasons why people may have no recourse to public funds. And again, really pleased that our voluntary sector colleagues, led by Robin Brierley, who runs Modern Slavery, West Midlands network, and they are looking with colleagues from the combined authority around what are the issues. Let's make sure we have the best possible chance to ensure that homelessness again is not wrapped up with those that have other challenges around right to remain, right to work. So yeah, as Neelam said, we're kind of keeping out of mischief and trying to keep ourselves busy. And again, I just want to thank everybody, because as I say, this is cross-sector, great folks in the combined authority, and it's, yeah, and Neelam, you know, is a miracle. It is a great privilege to be able to be the independent chair of this stuff.
Thank you both. Are there any questions from anyone? No, there's no questions. I'll just add one comment really, and I think you more or less answered that. Is do you envisage homelessness to grow with the cost of living rise?
Yeah, I think is the answer. I think certainly. One of the good things about it is that we have got frontline services that are seeing things happen sometimes earlier, statutory services, and then we've got the wider systems. And I think we're seeing this kind of the tsunami of debt, as we're kind of calling it, that is going to have implications. But also, Councillor Carmichael, we're seeing mental health issues.
Yeah.
Just I think even in my own organisation in the last 6 months, we've had more serious incident issues that have been as a result of distress and mental ill health than probably we would have had in the pre-COVID, the previous year or 2 years at a time. So yeah, I think we do need to really expect that and be geared up for it.
Okay. And are you actually seeing much with people being evicted from private sector? That's something you're seeing a lot of, because I'm having a lot of inquiries as a councillor.
Yeah.
That kind of.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that the numbers are creeping up in terms of evictions, because obviously the kind of the stuff that government put in during the pandemic is being lifted, but obviously it's being easily lifted. And I think there is still a bit of a backlog in courts yet as well, Chair. So we are expecting a bit of a tsunami. I don't think we've seen the worst of it. But one of the things that we have done in the task force, because we kind of knew this is kind of coming, is we've worked with our Office of Data Analytics to kind of put a dashboard together so that our partners, our local authority partners and others can look at kind of wards and neighbourhoods within their local authorities where they believe that more people might be at risk of eviction, so that any kind of early help advice can be, rather than doing it in a scattergun approach, you can do it in a kind of targeted prevention way. But we're definitely keeping an eye on all of that, really, because we know. But we also know from the austerity and the welfare reform that happened in 2010, it doesn't happen in the first few years. It takes a good 5 to 7 years to really see that kind of shift. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at with that.
You will keep that board updated with that. You will keep this board updated, won't you?
We will, of course we will. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Did Jonathan or is it Richard wants to come in? I think you're on mute.
Oh yeah, there you go. I was just going to come in on the domestic abuse issue that's touched on there. I've struggled to get this off the ground. That's my responsibility there. But this is such a key area for us. We're absolutely recognised here at the OPCC that there is we want to make sure that the practices that West Mids Police follow in relation to investigating domestic abuse cases doesn't end up driving victims into homelessness. With the actions we've picked up are around meetings with the Commissioner and full engagement with that subgroup. So just to kind of give a degree of reassurance, that is still something that we've got on the books and will be progressing.
Thank you. There's no further questions, and so just thank you both. That was excellent. Thank you, and obviously Jean, thank you. I know you're a volunteer in this. That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Thanks. So we'll move on to any other business. We've had no items put through, so we'll just say future meetings have been scheduled. at the moment. They are virtual, but they may be in person, which will notify you before the next meeting, I presume. That's how it works. Okay, so this meeting's closing, and thank you all for attending. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thanks all. Have a good day.
Thanks so much, Chair. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Goodbye.